Mr. President, I too come to speak today regarding pharmaceutical costs and what can we do to make life-saving medications and sometimes just medications who make our lives a little bit better, but make these medicines more affordable to the average American. And Mr. President, I happen to be a doctor, and I can tell you I will approach these remarks as a fellow who has seen medicine evolve, who has seen the incredible positive benefits of pharmaceutical innovation, but also as a doc who sometimes saw that patients were unable to afford innovation. And the question in my mind is, how do we give the patient the power to afford these innovative medicines? Because if she cannot afford, it is as if the innovation never occurred. And for her, it is as it never did occur. So give the patient the power. Let me make some remarks about the pharmaceutical company. There have been incredible advances. When I was in medical school, cutting away part of one's stomach, not the belly, but part of the stomach, as I would tell patients where the food goes after you swallow it, cutting away a part of that stomach because of ulcer disease was one of the most common procedures done in surgery. And then histamine blockers came along, H2 blockers, cimetidine was the first. And all of a sudden, a surgery, which was done multiple times a week, was scarcely ever done. And those medicines are now sold over the counter. This morning, I've got a little bit of arthritis, so I take my non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, which used to be sold by prescription, now over the counter, along with my H2 blocker, my Pepcid, which used to be sold by prescription, is now over the counter. I take them in the morning, my back feels better, and all of this are medicines which are generic, routine, and we indeed take for granted the innovation. I could go on. I'm a liver doctor. Hepatitis C used to be an incurable disease, which in a certain percent of those infected would lead to cirrhosis, vomiting blood at the end of your life, liver cancer, and death. And now hepatitis C is cured by taking pills for several weeks. Amazing. Human immunodeficiency virus, AIDS. When I was in residency, if you got HIV, you died. There was no cure whatsoever. And now people live with it for decades. It is a disease you live with but do not die from, and we speak of actually now developing cures for HIV. That is the promise of a vibrant pharmaceutical industry. Lives that not only live when otherwise they would pass away, but lives that are lived with better quality of life. Now that said, if the patient doesn't have the power, the patient has no leverage in this situation. I was recently with others in a conversation with the new head of the Congressional Budget Office. And the CBO head said, you know, everybody has leverage in the healthcare marketplace except the patient. Everybody else has leverage, but not the patient. That is so true. Let me give some examples of how the patient lacks leverage in the pharmaceutical marketplace. First, I'll say, if I go to church, and I do go to church regularly, and there is a Bernie Sanders supporter yanking on this lapel, and a Donald Trump supporter yanking on this lapel, and they're complaining about the same thing, they're either talking about surprise medical bills or the high cost of drugs. It is something that touches each American. But it doesn't have to be that. Consumer Reports did an article about a year ago now in which they sent secret shoppers out to retail pharmacies to buy 5 generic medications, a prescription for each 5. And again, generic, like the over-the-counter pills I'm taking. And they went and they paid anywhere from $66 to $900 for the same 5 drugs. Now, we can assume that the acquisition cost was about $60 because you could buy it someplace, an independent pharmacy or online, for $66. But 3 or 4 chain pharmacies were charging $900 for medications that they could acquire for less than $60. And you could argue, well, why did the patient pay? Because we have so little advertising, if you will, of a cost competition of what a generic medicine would cost. So imagine you have a health savings account, you're going to go out and you're going to buy your prescriptions, you get charged $900 for something that should cost you $60. This is a situation in which the patient has no leverage. By the way, you could say, why didn't insurance cover it? Because these patients were posing as if uninsured. So the retail pharmacies, the chain pharmacies, had figured out it is the uninsured who do not have somebody working on their behalf that are going to be the most ripe for the picking for the high prices. Wait, the uninsured are the ones that we're going to exploit. The ones paying cash. That is wrong, Mr. President. That is not the patient having the power. It is the patient being used as a victim. There's other things that we can see where it's called evergreening. You have a drug and you make just a little bit of a tweak to it that doesn't improve its importance or its efficacy as a drug, no clinical benefit, but it extends the intellectual property protections. Now, laws that were conceived of, passed by Congress to reward innovation, to encourage creativity, are instead being used to stifle competition and to extend patent lives so that we, the patients and the taxpayers, have to pay more. Not for innovation, but rather because somebody figured out how to evergreen. So on the one hand, I am going to praise pharmaceutical companies for life-saving drugs that have meant so much to me, my family, and everyone who's listening today, but also ask, why should we reward that which is not innovative, but which is merely arbitraging laws meant to encourage innovation? We should not encourage arbitraging laws. Other issues, patent thickets, so-called, where companies file large numbers of patents on parts of their drugs that are not innovative. They're just kind of byproducts of the production process in order to keep competition. Citizens petitions, which typically come on 6 months before a drug is about to become generic. And so all of a sudden we have all these petitions that must be kind of navigated by the companies seeking to introduce the generic. And then a rebate system which works to preserve market share, but also to increase prices and to keep them high so patients do not benefit from competition. So if we're going to say the patient should have the power in order to have lower prices, we can say right now the system seems to be aligned against the patient. What can we do? Well, my office and others have several proposals in the current pieces of legislation going through. So-called real-time benefit analysis. A prescription is ordered for a patient. The patient scans a barcode, and it would say, at this point, with your deductible and your copay, this is how much this drug is going to cost you. But there is a generic available, and you can get that generic instead. That would be a real-time benefit analysis that would save the patient money. We just talked to the folks at Blue Cross California. They're coming up with so-called gain sharing. If the patient selects a lower cost medication, the patient receives some of the savings that would otherwise all go back to the insurance company. Another great idea. Senator Braun was speaking about the patient having the skin in the game. In this case, that is, if you will, receiving skin, because the patient shares the benefit with the payor of being cost conscious. That's the patient having the power. We can also have value-based arrangements. Pharmaceutical companies, to their credit, have proposed these. You only get paid if you're the pharmaceutical company if the medicine works. If the medicine doesn't work, you don't get paid. If it does work, you do. A value-based arrangement, we have a bill with Senator Warner that would do that. Another thing I'll mention is attempting to cap Part D exposure for if you're a senior citizen and you're in your catastrophic portion of your policy, then you can cap the amount that the senior might be exposed to. Under current law, she might be paying 5% of $100,000 worth of medicine, an essential drug to treat cancer, and she's paying 5% of that $100,000. In addition to the 5% of the other medications that she's receiving. This is something that many seniors cannot afford, and this is something that we as Congress can find mechanisms by which we can cap that exposure but still hold taxpayers whole. Now, we've got to enhance existing markets, and as you might guess, my theme is that we should enhance it in terms of giving the patient the power, but we have to also preserve the innovation that have led to these great drugs that I've spoken of earlier. If all we do is steal intellectual property from pharmaceutical companies, we'll lose these innovative drugs. But we, again, need to have those drugs affordable for the patients. And this is the tension. Promote innovation, but ensure affordability. We have a number of solutions, such as those I've just mentioned in the Health Committee and now in the Finance Committee. Republicans have solutions. My office continues to work on those. I look forward to working with my colleagues on their implementation. And Mr. President, I yield the floor.